Hey, what happened? Happened. Welcome to The Big Puzzle. In this podcast, we explore the subtle connections between science, religion, politics, economics, and history. One piece at a time, we unveil the big picture of this shared experience that we call life. So, today I want to talk a little about happening. What does that mean? And I want to connect several pieces of the puzzle. When I get some feedback from these videos, the most common one is that I all over the place, and always the suggestion is, you need to pick one direction and move in that direction. But that's the problem. In this channel, I'm trying to explore the connections, the multi-dimensional connections of different concepts, because I think that there is where the value is, and this will be one of those cases. So let's get started. First of all, thank you for all the visitors in the last video. I hope you are coming back. I noticed that many of you came from Italy. That means that Alessandro has a lot of good friends. But also, like everyone from Argentina, I'm 1/4 Italian from North Italy. The Falchi, Asandri, from San Pietro in the north. And so, ciao, amici. Now, this video is also inspired on Alessandro's book, but it's just a little thing that he just went through, but I think it's very interesting. And he was talking about Hegel and the dialectic, and then the dialectic materialism by Marx, but this idea that the change, so I think it's called one of the laws of dialectic. I read Hegel probably when I was in my 20s, early 20s. And I don't know. These guys were writing a lot to say very little. And I guess they wanted to sell books. But they have an interesting effect that people read them, they barely understand something, and then they feel superior because they could understand something, or they believe that they understood something that other people didn't understand. Especially with Marx, I got sick during especially during my university time, to have people telling me, "Oh yeah, the problem is that you don't understand Marx." And these people that they did understand Marx, they never passed calculus 101. So I often wonder, well, what kind of intelligence do they have that allows them to understand these, supposedly brilliant minds, but they cannot do basic calculations. But I already talked about that extensively. I don't want to go back there. But one of the laws, I think it was called, of dialectic, was the idea that a change in quantity eventually produces a change in quality. And I think that the example that they say, well, a change in temperature turns water into vapor, right? So it's just a change in 1 degree. In Celsius, you go from 99 to 100, and that produces a change in, the state of water, from water to vapor, or to a gas, and from liquid to a gas. Let's say things physically accurate. So it's an interesting concept, and again, all these people use this idea with the idea of change, and then they say, well, the proletariat and the revolution, and eventually when we reach this point, and everything will collapse, and then will come the peak of the dialectic, the final synthesis that for whatever reason is communism. It's not. And that's not how the world works. But that doesn't mean that this concept of having a change in quantity can produce a change in quality. And we're going to explore a little that. So let's start going back to artificial intelligence, and in particular, neural networks. Recently, this week, I was reading somebody that created this graph saying, oh, all the different layers of artificial intelligence. And they say, well, at the core is artificial intelligence. On top of that is machine learning, then neural network, then deep learning, and then transformers, and so on. And I commented there, say, you know what? People who really worked in those topics, in those technical circles, they will never call neural networks artificial intelligence. I mean, that felt like something the media would say, right? We all understand, I include myself, we understood that there's no intelligence here. It's just cool math and statistics. But let's talk a little about the origin. And again, if you want to go into more detail, go back to Alessandro's book. But the perceptron and how to connect different nodes and trying to replicate or try to imitate in a way how we perceive the neurons to work in the brain. That's why it's called neural networks. So each node is a neuron that is connected with other nodes or other neurons in different layers. But originally, those connections were through linear functions, right? So if this node had this value, then it will propagate to all of the other nodes in the next layer, by a linear function. So different weights, but all were linear. And immediately they ran into a problem that was not really working. And I can't remember the details, but somebody said, well, but that's because that's not how the neurons work, right? The neurons have synapses, and those are based on imbalance, if I recall correctly, between calcium and potassium, between in between the cells and the axon of the neuron, the axle. So, and that triggers immediately. So that's why it's a synapse. It fires. It's not linear. It's not building up and down the connection between the cells. It just change from one state to the other and back. So they started to try to model those. And one way, there are several approaches, but one way was using the sigmoid or the logistic function that I cover extensively in one of my least watched videos. I will never understand why, because it was really fun. And I think you could learn a lot from that one. But if you remember, that function is close to 0 and then grows, and then it goes close to 1, right? But that growth is very fast. And in that video, we explore how the first part, when it starts going up, it's basically an exponential growth. So that's why it's very difficult for people to understand that most of the exponential growth that we see is actually just a sigmoid. At some point, it will saturate and will not keep growing forever. So nothing can grow forever. So in the end, everything is kind of sigmoid. Everything reaches a limit. But so they changed those linear functions with these kind of triggering functions that change the value really fast. And then, well, they became way better. So much better that that's basically what we're doing today. Nobody's using any linear function to connect to neurons in a neural network or to nodes in a neural network. So that shows that there's still some relationship in which things we observe in the real world and things that we're modeling in the computer, and that's really good. So that those are called the activation functions, right? How they activate the next neuron. And the other example that I was thinking of is about this change between in quantity, that change in quality, are explosions, right? And in particular, when we talk about reaching a critical mass. What is a critical mass? It's not, a Catholic priest that it's criticizing the government. That could also be a critical mass. But what we're talking is about the density of a mass. And I think that the term comes, at least that's the first time that I heard of it, is talking about atomic explosions, right? Nuclear explosions. And why critical mass? Because I think we talk about this in some other video, but if you think about uranium, right, that we're going to try to create an explosion with. So uranium, what it happens is it's a very big atom, a lot of neutrons, a lot of protons, a lot of electrons. It's so big that it's fairly easy to break it, right? So all the positives and negatives are barely balanced in the nucleus. So the positive and negative, well, all the positives together, let's say, right, are kind of creating too much pressure. So they just need a little tap, and they will break into two other atoms. And that little tap could be produced by a neutron. So what happens is, okay, if one of these is hit, one atom is hit by a neutron, it breaks, and when it breaks, it liberates neutrons. And those neutrons could go and hit another atom, right, and do the same thing. So if the mass of uranium is not dense enough, that just happens, and the whole mass degrades with time. But what they do when they want to create an explosion is first they create a traditional explosion around that mass, right? So it kind of put a lot of explosives around that mass, and when those explode, they compress that mass of uranium, and now all the atoms are way closer together. So when one breaks, it sends some neutrons, but it's more likely that neutron is going to hit another one, right? Another atom, and so on. And that escalates really fast. When that starts, it's an exponential growth, right? So the number of atoms breaking up and liberating energy and neutrons grows over and over. Well, until you run out of uranium, right? And then becomes a sigmoid because there's nothing more to explode. So that is how atomic bombs work, right? So again, it's this idea that a small change, in this case the critical mass, the volume, it reaches one point in which just explodes, right? So this concept also, you can see it in climate change, or at least is claimed to be the problem with climate change. The problem with climate change is that there's this assumption that there's a certain temperature that when it's reached, that will produce it will propagate fast changes in the whole planet, right? So it's not a gradual thing. So the build-up in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and increasing the temperature, the average temperature, well, yeah, it's annoying, it's a little warmer, but the theory is at some point that will trigger, a big explosion of changes in the planet. And that is a problem, because if you believe that that's the case, you cannot prove it. And people who opposes that will say, well, but I haven't seen anything. I mean, nothing has changed. So all these things that you're saying. And so there's this discussion about something when some people think that should be linear and you should be seeing some of those effects, and the others say no, you're basically not seeing anything until you see the change in quality by a small change in quantity. So again, we see that process everywhere. Something that is related to this that happens a lot in chemistry is the idea of a catalyst. So a catalyst is something that you add to a process that is not necessarily part of the process, but it allows some things to happen that wouldn't happen without the catalyst. I don't know if I explained that clear enough, and I haven't prepared a good example for this, but if you studied chemistry, especially biochemistry, you're probably familiar with this idea, right? That something that you add that forces other things to happen that wouldn't happen. And also this could be related to the idea of synergy. So, of synergy. In synergy, what you're saying is that the whole is more than the sum of the parts, right? And one example could be, immunodepressants and a virus. So if you just are immunodepressed, that won't kill you. If you get infected with the virus, that wouldn't kill you. But if you have both at a time, that will kill you. So that's a simple example of synergy. So both things separate, you have one after the other, nothing happens, you survive. But when they happen together, so the result is more than the sum. It's not like you feel twice as bad, right? You die, right? Because they accelerate each other. So they interact with each other in a way that, again, produces a change in quality. In this case, the quality of being alive is turned into the quality of not being alive anymore. Now, what I'm trying to go with all of this is a little more general, and I think that we usually don't think it this way. So at the beginning, I said, in the hook, I said, what happened? And that word happen, when something happened, is a change in quality, right? When things change gradually, we don't think about something happening. Most of the time, we don't even notice that something is changing. But when they change, like the neuron, when they get activated, when something changes, when we say that something happened, and things are happening all around us. I like this word. It doesn't have an equivalent in English, but let me try to explain it. So the word I'm thinking about is ganas. Tener ganas, to have ganas. What is ganas? Well, again, there's no direct translation, but the closest I could think of is kind of some kind of lazy desire, right? So when you need to do something, sometimes you would say, I don't have enough ganas, or I'm trying to gather the ganas to do this. It's not desire in the sense that desire motivates you. Ganas is not the motivation. It's something that kind of builds up for whatever reason until you feel enough that you would do something. So and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the things that happen in our lives and the things that don't happen in our lives, and which are these processes that need to build up until those things happen. And sometimes we give up too early, and we miss the opportunity of seeing something happening. So, for example, I wrote a few books, and they're not selling. And I think they're good, and people who actually read them, I got good feedback. So I believe that, and they have no reason to lie to me about that. So I think that the books are good. So I often wonder, well, is there anything else besides writing it and doing some basic promotion that I should be doing until I reach that critical mass? And some people might read it. And maybe this video is that. Maybe this is the tipping point in which now everybody who watches this video say, hey, I'm very curious about these books, and they go and buy it and they talk to their friends, and suddenly I'm in the bestseller list, or not. I mean, might be that it's not. But again, in our life, things are happening, things are building up, things are accelerating, and it feels like we cannot stop them. And then they stop on their own, and maybe they stop not at the level that we wanted them to stop. Maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower. But I think this is something that we could think a little more about. What is happening? It also goes with this idea of how I think that the universe simulation hates the continuity, right? Because nothing is continuous and everything is discrete. And this idea of things happening goes in line with that, right? Or maybe it's just an attention bias that we notice things when they change suddenly and not when they change gradually. That could be an explanation or a different hypothesis. Also, I was thinking about the concept of slippery slope, and that usually when somebody now claims it's a slippery slope, it's immediately dismissed. But what is a slippery slope? A slippery slope is basically one of these processes that, when you get into a slippery slope, it's not that the slope is increasing, but if the slope is constant, there's an acceleration, right? Part of the gravity is pushing you down, and acceleration produces an exponential change in position, right? A linear change in velocity, if you remember your kinematics, but an exponential change in position. So that's why we call it slippery slope. You start moving very, very slow and you ignore it, but then, you accelerate. And what would be the saturation there? Well, it's not good when you reach the wall at the end of the slope. But I don't know. I think that these are kind of interesting concepts to explore, to think about, and especially to, like I was saying, as a homework, to think about what am I doing, what am I accumulating, what ganas I am getting, and how can I prevent things from happening if I don't want them to happen? How can I stop them before they explode? So all those things, I don't know, I found them interesting. So that would be for this one. I hope you learned something. It helps you think about something, hopefully making your lives, your decisions easier. And well, see you in the next one. Bye bye.